When my father died, my husband inherited our mansion and $33 million. He laughed as he threw me out into the rain, saying I was useless now that my father was gone. 3 days later, the lawyer revealed the truth. My husband went pale because he did not just lose the money. He owed me $74 million, and I was about to collect every single cent. My name is Audrey, and at 34 years old, I thought grief was the only thing I would have to survive today. I was wrong. As a forensic accountant, I uncover hidden financial crimes for a living, but I was blind to the monster sleeping in my own bed. Before I tell you how I destroyed him, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been betrayed by the one person who promised to protect you. The rain in Seattle felt like ice against my skin as I stood at the edge of the open grave. My father Thomas was being lowered into the wet ground. Everyone around me was crying, holding black umbrellas and whispering condolences. Everyone except for my husband Gavin. I watched him check his gold Rolex for the 5th time in 10 minutes. He did not look sad. He looked bored. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not a man burying the father-in-law who had paid off his gambling debts for years. As soon as the last guest drove away in their black sedan, Gavin grabbed my arm. His grip was tight. It was painful. I turned to him expecting a hug or a word of comfort. I needed him to hold me. Instead, he dragged me behind a large marble angel statue, away from the view of the cemetery staff. The look in his eyes made my blood run cold. It was not love, it was pure contempt. He reached into his expensive black suit jacket. He pulled out a thick envelope and shoved it hard against my chest. It was already damp from the rain. "Sign this," he said. His voice was sharp and cold. It lacked the warmth he had faked for 5 years. I looked down at the paper, trembling. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. I looked up at him in shock, unable to breathe. "Gavin, what is this? Why are you doing this now?" He sneered at me and adjusted his tie. "Your dad is dead, Audrey. The play is over. I am sick of looking at your miserable face every morning. I only stayed because the old man promised to take care of us, in his will. Now that he is gone, I do not need to pretend anymore. You are useless to me. Sign the papers and find somewhere else to cry." I stood there frozen as the man I loved for a decade turned into a stranger in seconds. He did not just break my heart. He was preparing to break my entire life. My hands shook so violently that the divorce papers rattled in the wind. The ink was already starting to blur from the relentless Seattle drizzle, but the message was clear. I looked up at Gavin, searching for any trace of the man I married 5 years ago. There was nothing but cold calculation in his eyes. "Why are you doing this, Gavin?" I asked, my voice cracking. "We just buried my father. I have stood by you through everything." "Why now?" Gavin let out a short, cruel laugh. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, not with affection, but with intimidation. "Because I saw the will, Audrey. I peeked in the old man's safe last week while you were busy crying at the hospital. He left everything to me. $33 million in cash in the estate. And you know what he left you? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My father loved me. There had to be a mistake." But Gavin continued his barrage. "He thought you were too weak, Audrey. He told me once that you had no head for business, so he left his legacy to the son he never had. Me. Now that I am a multimillionaire, I do not need a wife who counts coupons and nags me about credit card limits." The injustice burned hotter than my grief. I took a step forward, forcing him to look me in the eye, weak. "I managed your life for 5 years, Gavin, when you owed $50,000 to those loan sharks in Las Vegas who paid them off. I did. I sold my car and emptied my savings account so they would not break your legs. When you lost your job because you were hungover, I wrote your resume and found you a new one. I cleaned up every mess you ever made." Gavin rolled his eyes as if my sacrifices were boring him. He brushed a speck of invisible dust off his designer lapel. "That is exactly your problem. You are an enabler, Audrey. You liked fixing me because it made you feel superior. But here is the reality check. That was you being stupid, not saintly. You invested in a sinking ship. But now that ship has turned into a yacht and you are not invited on board." He leaned in close, his expensive cologne mixing with the smell of wet earth. "Let me be clear. This is my house now. My money. My life. You are just a reminder of the time when I was poor. I do not want memories, Audrey. I want a future. And that future does not include a woman who knows my darkest secrets. You have 1 hour to get your trash out of my mansion before I have security throw it on the street." He turned his back on me and walked toward his car without looking back once. I stood alone in the rain, realizing for the first time that my marriage had not been a partnership. It had been a long con. And I was the mark. I was not just losing my husband and my father in the same week. I was about to lose the roof over my head because I had trusted the wrong men. But as I watched his taillights fade into the mist, a spark of anger ignited in my chest. He called me weak. He called me stupid. He was about to find out that he should have read the fine print. The drive back to the estate was a blur of red taillights and blinding rain. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, praying that this was just a twisted joke. But when I turned onto the long driveway lined with the oak trees my father had planted 30 years ago, the reality hit me harder than the storm. A bright yellow van was parked directly in front of the wrought iron gates. The side read "Emergency Locksmith Services." A man in blue coveralls was drilling into the main lock, sending sparks flying into the gray afternoon air. Standing over him, supervising the destruction like a general on a battlefield, was Dante, Gavin's brother-in-law. He was wearing a tracksuit that cost more than my first car paid for, with money he had borrowed from us and never returned. He held a large umbrella over his own head, ensuring he stayed perfectly dry while chaos unfolded around him. Then I looked at the lawn. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a bomb had gone off inside my walk-in closet. My vintage suitcases were thrown open. My clothes were scattered across the wet manicured grass. Silk blouses were being trampled into the mud. First editions of books my father had given me were soaking up water, their pages swelling and ruining forever. My entire life had been evicted and tossed aside like garbage. I slammed the car into park and threw the door open. The rain instantly soaked me, but I did not care. Dante turned as he heard my car door slam. He did not look guilty. He looked delighted. He was holding his phone up in the air, the ring light attachment glowing bright against the gloomy sky. He was live streaming. I could see the stream of comments flying up his screen. "Look everyone, the deposed queen has finally returned," Dante announced to his followers, his voice booming with theatrical excitement. He pointed the camera directly at my face, zooming in on my ruined makeup and tear-stained cheeks. "Look at her. Just this morning she was walking around like she owned the place. Now look at her picking her trash off the lawn." I marched toward him, my boots sinking into the wet earth. "Dante, stop this immediately," I screamed, reaching for his phone. He stepped back, effortlessly laughing as he panned the camera back to my soaking wet designer dresses. "This is what happens when you marry up and forget your place," he sneered to the camera. "My brother Gavin is the king of the castle now, and the king is cleaning house. Say hi to the internet, Audrey. You are finally trending." I ignored Dante and his phone. I did not care about the clothes ruining on the grass. All I could think about was the jewelry box on my dresser that held my mother's wedding ring and the photo albums in the study. I lunged toward the heavy mahogany front doors, desperate to salvage the only things that truly mattered to me. But Dante moved faster. He stepped in front of me like a bouncer at a cheap nightclub, his massive frame blocking the entrance completely. "You are not on the guest list anymore, sweetie," Dante grunted. He pushed me back with a heavy hand, sending me stumbling onto the wet pavement. "You heard the man. No trespassing." I tried to push past him again, screaming that I had a right to get my personal belongings, but he just crossed his arms and smirked. Then I heard the sound of the sliding glass door opening above us. I looked up to the master bedroom balcony. Gavin was standing there, leaning casually over the iron railing. He was holding something that made my heart stop. It was a dusty bottle of Chateau Margaux 1985. My father had bought that bottle the year I was born. It was the most precious item in his cellar, meant to be opened only on the day his first grandchild was born. It was a symbol of the future family we were supposed to build. Gavin, do not touch that, I screamed, my voice raw. That is not yours. Put it down. Gavin looked at the bottle and then down at me. He smiled a wicked grin that made my stomach turn. He pulled the cork out with his teeth and spat it over the railing so it landed near my feet. Everything in this house is mine now, Audrey, he shouted, his voice echoing across the courtyard. And I think this occasion calls for a toast. To my freedom. He tipped the bottle upside down. The dark red liquid cascaded down from the balcony. I could not move. The wine splashed over my head, mixing with the freezing rain, drenching my hair and running down my face like blood. It smelled of expensive grapes and shattered dreams. I stood there shivering and sticky, tasting the vintage wine that was meant for a celebration of life, now being used to celebrate my destruction. Dante roared with laughter, clapping his hands while capturing every second for his viewers. "Look at that," he yelled. "A champagne shower for the loser." I wiped the wine from my eyes, watching Gavin take a swig from the bottle before tossing the rest of the contents onto the driveway. He looked down at me with zero remorse. "Now get off my property before I have the dogs chase you out." The mixture of expensive wine and freezing rain blinded me, but it could not wash away the rage burning in my chest. I wiped my face with a trembling hand and reached for my phone. "I am calling the police," I screamed up at the balcony, my voice cracking with desperation. "You cannot just kick me out of my own home, Gavin. This is illegal. This is domestic abuse and theft." Gavin did not even flinch. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out my spare phone, which I had left on the hallway table earlier. He tossed it casually over the railing. It shattered on the pavement right next to my boot, sending shards of glass into the mud. "Go ahead and call them," he taunted, his voice dripping with amusement. "In fact, I will save you the trouble." He leaned forward, gripping the iron railing, looking down at me like I was an insect. "You seem to forget how the law works, Audrey. This house was in your father's name, and since I am the sole heir listed on the preliminary probate documents, this is technically my private property. You are not a resident here anymore. You are a trespasser, so please call the cops. They will just help me take out the trash." 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up the driveway, their blue and red lights flashing against the gray sky. I felt a surge of hope. I rushed toward the officers, explaining that my husband had locked me out, destroyed my property, and physically assaulted me with the wine. But my relief turned to horror when I saw Gavin calmly walk out the front door holding a stack of notarized documents. He played the part of the grieving, confused homeowner perfectly. The lead officer read the papers under his flashlight while the rain poured down on us. He looked at me with pity, but his voice was firm and professional. "Ma'am, I am sorry, but Mr. Gavin has proof of residence and executorship. Unless you have a court order stating otherwise, I have to ask you to leave the property immediately." "But I grew up here," I pleaded, pointing at the window of my old bedroom. "My father just died. You cannot let him do this." The officer shook his head, stepping aside so Gavin could stand next to him. "It is a civil matter, ma'am, but right now you are trespassing on private property. If you refuse to leave voluntarily, I will have to arrest you." I looked at Gavin. He was smirking behind the officer, mouthing the word goodbye. Dante was still filming, zooming in on my defeat. I had no choice. I was being evicted from my childhood home by the law that was supposed to protect me. I got into my car, my clothes sticking to my skin, and backed out of the driveway, leaving my dignity and my legacy behind in the mud. The digital clock on my dashboard read 3 in the morning. I was parked in the back corner of a 24-hour supermarket lot, under the buzzing orange glow of a street lamp, my stomach twisted with a hunger that was sharp and demanding. I had not eaten since breakfast before the funeral. The irony was suffocating. My husband was probably popping champagne in a mansion worth millions while I was debating if I could afford a sandwich. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked into the neon-lit store. The fluorescent lights hurt my tired eyes. I grabbed a bottle of water and a cheap turkey sandwich wrapped in plastic. It was a humble meal, but right now it looked like a feast. I walked to the counter, keeping my head down, praying I would not run into anyone I knew. I slid my platinum credit card into the reader. It was a supplementary card linked to the main family account which I had managed for years. I waited for the approval beep. Instead, a harsh buzzer sounded. Transaction declined. The cashier, a teenage boy with tired eyes, looked at me. "Try it again," he said, popping his gum. "Maybe the chip is dirty." I wiped the chip on my sleeve and inserted it again. My heart hammered against my ribs. Declined. Please contact your financial institution. The words flashed across the small screen in red letters. I felt the heat rise up my neck, burning my cheeks. I tried my debit card next. Declined. Then, the emergency gas card. Declined. Gavin. He had not just locked the doors to the house. He had systematically severed every financial lifeline I had. He knew I had no cash on me. He wanted me to starve. He wanted me to crawl back to him begging for scraps so he could kick me again. I looked at the cashier mumbling an apology and walked out of the store empty-handed. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, sealing me out of the world of warmth and commerce. Back in the car, I locked the doors and curled up in the driver's seat. The leather was cold. I was 34 years old. I had a master's degree. I was the daughter of a billionaire. And I was homeless. The humiliation was worse than the hunger. I opened my wallet searching for a stray dollar bill. There was nothing. But tucked behind my useless credit cards was a small, worn photograph. It was me and my father on a fishing trip when I was 10. He was smiling, holding up a trout, looking so strong and invincible. I ran my thumb over his face. I remembered what he told me that day when I lost a big fish. He said, "Audrey, tears are for grieving, but action is for living. Never let them see you bleed." I wiped the tears from my face. Gavin thought he had taken everything. He thought I was weak. He forgot that I was the one who taught him how to read a balance sheet. I was the one who knew where every single dollar in that family came from. I put the photo back and opened my laptop. The hunger in my stomach was replaced by a different kind of hunger. A hunger for revenge. If Gavin wanted a war, I would give him one. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was tired and broken. She was a wife who had just been discarded. But as I stared into my own eyes, something shifted. The sadness began to calcify into something harder, something useful. Gavin had called me useless. He said I was stupid. He had forgotten who I really was. I was not just a housewife. I was a senior forensic accountant. I hunted financial predators for a living. I found money that men like Gavin tried to hide. I reached over to the passenger seat and unzipped my laptop bag. It was the only thing I had managed to grab before Dante pushed me out. I opened my silver MacBook, and the screen flickered to life, illuminating the dark car with a cold blue glow. My battery was at 40%. That was more than enough time to destroy him. I connected to the supermarket's free public Wi-Fi and navigated to our family cloud server. This was the moment of truth. Gavin had been quick to change the physical locks on the doors. He had been quick to cut off my credit cards. But Gavin was lazy. He was arrogant. He never thought details mattered. I typed in his password. The same password he had used for 5 years. Access granted. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. He had forgotten to lock the digital gate. I was in. I did not waste time looking at the folders labeled wedding photos or honeymoon. I went straight to the folder marked taxes and investments. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The crying woman was gone. The professional was here. I started downloading everything. Bank statements for the last 5 years. Credit card bills. The LLC documents for the house. The preliminary trust fund paperwork. I needed to build a timeline. I needed to see where the money was going. Gavin thought he had inherited $33 million free and clear. But I knew my father better than anyone. My father was a man of details. He never gave money away without strings attached. I opened the most recent PDF of the trust agreement. My eyes scanned the legal jargon that would make most people dizzy. Section 4. B. There it was. The clause that Gavin had ignored. The clause that required a trustee's signature for any withdrawal over $5,000. And right below it was the definition of good steward. I pulled up the bank records next. I saw the transaction for the locksmith. I saw the transaction for the party's supplies he bought for tonight. I saw the transfer pending for the new McLaren. Every single dollar he was spending was a violation of the trust he did not technically own yet. I wasn't just looking at numbers anymore. I was looking at evidence. I was looking at a crime scene. And for the first time in 3 days, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just found the prey's tracks. Gavin wanted to play dirty. He had no idea that he just handed the rulebook to the referee. 2 days passed. While I sat in a cheap motel room organizing spreadsheets and highlighting bank transfers, my former home was being desecrated. I watched it all unfold in real time thanks to Dante's obsession with social media. He was live streaming again, turning my father's wake into a carnival of greed. The elegance of the estate was gone, replaced by flashing strobe lights and thumping bass that rattled the windows. The living room where my father used to read poetry to my mother was now packed with strangers. Models in skimpy dresses danced on the furniture. Champagne corks popped every few seconds, foam spilling onto the Persian rugs that were older than the people standing on them. In the center of the chaos sat Gavin. He was lounging on my father's favorite leather armchair, looking like an emperor surveying his new kingdom. He held a crystal flute in one hand, and a cigar in the other, ashes falling carelessly onto the velvet upholstery. Dante climbed onto the coffee table, raising a magnum of Dom Perignon high in the air. The music lowered just enough for his voice to boom across the room. "Listen up, everyone," he shouted, his face flushed with alcohol and triumph. "Tonight we celebrate the new king of Seattle. My brother Gavin did not just inherit a house, he inherited an empire." The crowd cheered, raising their glasses. Gavin soaked it all up, a smug grin plastered on his face. But Dante was not done. He was not just there to party, he was there to close a deal. He knelt down next to Gavin, putting a heavy arm around his shoulder. And because the king is generous, he is about to make the biggest power move of the century. Gavin is putting $10 million into the future, into the only cryptocurrency that matters. Omnicoin. I watched on my laptop screen as Gavin nodded enthusiastically. "That is right," he slurred slightly, his eyes glassy. "Stocks are for dinosaurs. We are going to the moon. I am authorizing the transfer as soon as the funds clear tomorrow. 10 million, because I can." My stomach churned. Omnicoin was a pump and dump scheme. I had read about it on a fraud forum months ago. It was worthless vaporware. And Dante was the primary promoter. He was scamming his own brother-in-law before the body was even cold. But Gavin was too blinded by ego to see the knife in his back. He thought he was a visionary investor. In reality, he was just a piggy bank waiting to be smashed open. I took a screenshot of the video, Gavin promising to invest funds he did not technically control into a scam run by a known grifter. It was perfect. It proved he was reckless. It proved he was incompetent. And most importantly, it proved he was violating the good steward clause of the trust in the most spectacular way possible. "Go ahead, Gavin," I whispered to the screen. "Dig your grave a little deeper. I have the shovel ready." I watched the live stream feed with bated breath. The music in the living room had been lowered slightly, but the energy was still chaotic. Gavin stood in the center of the room, holding his phone to his ear like a weapon. Dante was filming him from a low angle, trying to make him look authoritative. It was clear that Gavin wanted an audience for this. He wanted everyone to see him command the family empire. He was calling Mr. Henderson. I knew the number he dialed by heart. I also knew Mr. Henderson was a man who respected rules above all else. He was not someone you bullied. But Gavin, drunk on cheap power and expensive champagne, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. "Henderson, where is my money?" Gavin barked into the phone. "I told you to wire the funds an hour ago. I have a deposit to make on a McLaren, and the dealership is waiting. Do not tell me about banking hours. I own the bank." I could not hear Mr. Henderson's reply, but I could see the color rising in Gavin's neck. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the device. The room went silent. The models and hangers-on sensed the tension. The party king was losing his cool. "Excuse me," Gavin shouted, his voice cracking. "Did you just say no to me? I am the heir. I am the one who pays your salary. You do not tell me about protocols. You press the button, and you send me my 33 million. There was a pause. Gavin listened, his eyes widening in disbelief. Then the rage took over. It was the same rage I had seen when he lost at poker, or when I refused to give him money for his gambling debts. It was the rage of a child who had been told no for the first time. "I do not care about the reading tomorrow," he screamed, spitting as he spoke. "I want it now. You are just a glorified Secretary Henderson. Do not forget your place." Gavin pulled the phone away from his ear and stared at it. Mr. Henderson must have hung up or refused to budge. The humiliation was instantaneous. Gavin let out a guttural roar and hurled the phone across the room. It smashed into the marble fireplace, shattering into a dozen pieces. The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the room completely. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Gavin adjusted his suit jacket, trying to regain his composure. He turned to Dante and the camera, his smile forced and terrifying. "Do not worry about that," he announced, waving his hand dismissively. "That old man is just a hired hand. He thinks he can lecture me about rules. Tomorrow morning after the will reading, I am firing him. I will hire a lawyer who knows how to listen to orders." Dante laughed nervously and signaled for the DJ to turn the music back up. The party resumed, but the vibe had shifted. I closed my laptop for a moment, taking a deep breath. Gavin had just threatened to fire the executor of the estate before he even legally owned the estate. He was burning bridges he had not even crossed yet. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Very interesting. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour diner hummed with a low headache-inducing buzz. It was 6 a.m. I was sitting in a red vinyl booth that smelled of old grease and stale cigarette smoke. My eyes felt heavy and gritty, like they were filled with sand. I had not slept in nearly 40 hours. I took a sip of the lukewarm black coffee. It tasted terrible, but the caffeine was the only thing keeping my brain firing. On the scratched laminate table, my laptop screen glowed with the documents I had extracted from the family server. I had spent the last 3 hours cross-referencing the bank statements with the preliminary will. Gavin had only read the bold print. He saw the numbers. He saw the words 33 million and stopped reading. That was his fatal flaw. He was greedy and lazy. My father, on the other hand, was meticulous. He was a man who believed that the devil was always in the details. I zoomed in on the bottom of page 14 of the trust agreement. It was the section Gavin had dismissed as standard legal boilerplate. The text was small, dense, and boring to the average eye. But to me, it was poetry. There, right under the distribution schedule, was a reference code that made my heart race. Subject to the Good Steward Clause and Trust Stipulations, Section 4B. I quickly navigated to the appendix folder, searching for Section 4B. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the file. I read the paragraph twice, just to be sure I was not hallucinating from exhaustion. It stated clearly that the beneficiary does not receive lump sum ownership. Instead, the assets remain the property of the trust until the beneficiary proves fiscal responsibility for a period of 12 months. And here was the kicker. The determination of fiscal responsibility was at the sole discretion of the appointed trustee. I sat back in the booth, a laugh bubbling up in my chest. It was a dark, hollow laugh, but it felt good. My father knew. He knew exactly who Gavin was. He knew that the moment he was gone, Gavin would try to take the money and run. So he built a cage. He dangled the money like cheese in a mousetrap, and Gavin had snapped it up without looking for the spring. The waitress walked by, refilling my coffee without asking. She looked at me with pity, seeing a woman with messy hair and dark circles under her eyes. She probably thought I was homeless or running away from a bad situation. She had no idea. I was not running away. I was loading my weapon. Gavin thought he had won the lottery. In reality, he had just signed a contract with the most strict landlord in history. Me. I looked at the screen one last time, memorizing the clause number. Section 4B. It was going to be the code that destroyed him. The sun had barely risen when Gavin made his next fatal mistake. The humiliation with the lawyer had festered overnight. He needed a victory. He needed a trophy to prove to the world and to himself that he was the new patriarch. And in Gavin's mind, nothing screamed power louder than a neon orange McLaren. I listened through the hacked baby monitor system as he argued with the dealership. They wanted a $200,000 non-refundable deposit by noon, or the car would go to another buyer. Gavin did not have the cash. But he had a house full of assets that he mistakenly believed were his. He paced around the library, his eyes landing on the walls. My mother had spent 40 years curating a collection of rare mid-century modern art. It was her soul expressed in canvas and oil. There were 5 paintings in that room alone worth over $3 million. To me, they were memories of my mother. To Gavin, they were just colorful squares that could be traded for horsepower. He pulled out his burner phone and dialed a number I did not recognize. It was not an auction house or a legitimate gallery. Legitimate places asked for provenance papers and insurance certificates. Gavin called a fence. A man known in the underground circles as the Vulture. I had seen his name in police reports during my fraud investigations. He was the guy you called when you wanted to turn stolen goods into dirty cash fast. Within an hour, a black van pulled up to the service entrance. A short, balding man in a leather jacket stepped out carrying a heavy metal briefcase. I watched on the screen as Gavin led him into the library. The Vulture did not appreciate the art. He did not care about the brushstrokes or the history. He just ran a UV light over the signatures and grunted. "I will give you $500,000 for the lot." The Vulture said, his voice raspy. "Cash, right now." Gavin did not even haggle. He did not care that he was selling a $3 million collection for pennies on the dollar. He just saw the briefcase. "Deal," Gavin said, shaking the man's hand. "Get them off the walls." Watching him rip my mother's legacy down was like a physical blow. My heart ached for the paintings I had grown up with, but my mind remained cold. By selling assets below market value to a known criminal, Gavin had just committed a felony, and I was recording every single second of it. My phone buzzed against the hard plastic of the diner table. It was a text from Maria, the head housekeeper. She was the only staff member who had not instantly bowed down to Gavin. The message was short and terrifying. "Come quick, they are stripping the library." I did not think. I just ran. I drove back to the estate, breaking every speed limit in the county. My tires screeched as I pulled up to the service entrance. The back doors of the black van were open. I saw the Vulture's men carelessly shoving a canvas wrapped in bubble wrap into the dark cargo hold. I recognized the size of the frame. It was my mother's favorite Rothko. I slammed my car door and sprinted toward them. "Gavin, stop this!" I screamed, my voice echoing off the stone walls. "You have no right. Those paintings are part of the estate trust. You cannot sell them." Gavin turned around. He was holding the metal briefcase tight against his chest. He looked at me with a mixture of amusement and pity. He did not look like a man caught in a crime. He looked like a man taking out the garbage. "Oh, look who decided to crash the party again," he drawled, stepping between me and the van. "You really need to get a hobby, Audrey. Maybe knitting or begging." I pointed a shaking finger at the van. "Those are not yours, Gavin. That is my mother's legacy. That collection is worth over $5 million. You cannot just pawn it off to some criminal in a driveway." Gavin threw his head back and laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "Your mother's art. Please. It is just depressing splotches of paint. It brings down the vibe of the whole house. I am doing us a favor. I am decluttering. I need this space for a pool table and maybe a bar." He turned to the Vulture, who was watching us with dead eyes. "We are good here, right?" The Vulture nodded and spat on the ground. 500 large, as agreed, no receipts, no returns." Gavin patted the briefcase. "Perfect. Take this trash out of my sight." I watched in horror as the van doors slammed shut. Gavin had just sold $5 million worth of appreciating assets for $500,000 in dirty cash. He had sold my mother's soul for 10% of its value just to buy a car. "You are insane," I whispered. "You just robbed the estate." Gavin stepped closer to me, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. "It is my estate, Audrey. And cash is king. There is no paper trail here. Just me, my money, and you, the crazy ex-wife who nobody believes. Now get off my property before I have you arrested again. This time I will press charges." He turned and walked back into the house, swinging the briefcase like a toy. I stood there as the van sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust in my face. I did not chase them. I did not cry. I simply lifted my phone, which had been recording video, from my chest pocket the entire time. I had him. I had the sale. I had the buyer's face. And I had Gavin admitting there was no paper trail. He thought he was clearing space. He was actually clearing the way for his own prison sentence. Two burly security guards hired by Dante grabbed me by the arms. Their grip was bruising, but I did not fight back. I did not scream. The old Audrey might have begged them to stop. The old Audrey might have caused a scene pleading for compassion. But that woman died the moment Gavin poured wine on her head. The woman standing here now was a forensic accountant collecting evidence, and silence was my best weapon. I let my body go limp, forcing them to drag me rather than walk me. It was a calculated move. It slowed them down just enough. As they hauled me toward the iron gates, I kept my phone pressed against my chest, the camera lens peering out from the fold of my coat collar. I angled my body slightly to the left, ensuring the frame was perfectly centered on the transaction happening in the driveway. On my screen, I captured everything in high definition. The vulture opened the metal briefcase. I zoomed in. It was packed tight with stacks of $100 bills held together by rubber bands. There was no paperwork, no bill of sale, no tax forms, just dirty money changing hands in broad daylight. I watched Gavin's eyes light up with greed as he ran his fingers over the cash. He looked like a starving man at a buffet, completely unaware that he was eating poison. I captured the handshake. I captured the vulture handing Gavin a business card that I knew would lead back to a shell company. I even managed to catch the license plate of the black van as the guards finally shoved me through the pedestrian gate and slammed it shut behind me. I stumbled onto the public sidewalk, my knees scraping against the concrete. The guards laughed, telling me to stay away from the property or they would call the cops. They had no idea that I was the one who was going to bring the law down on this entire circus. I stood up and brushed the dirt off my jeans. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from adrenaline. I checked the video file. It was perfect. In less than 3 minutes, Gavin had committed multiple felonies. By selling estate assets for cash without recording the transaction, he was guilty of tax evasion. By keeping the money for himself instead of depositing it into the trust account, he was guilty of embezzlement. And by dealing with a known fence, he was an accessory to money laundering. I uploaded the video immediately to 3 different secure cloud servers. This was my insurance policy. This was the smoking gun. Gavin thought he had just made a quick $500,000. What he had actually done was hand me the keys to his jail cell. I walked back to my car feeling lighter than I had in days. The art was gone and that hurt, but the evidence remained. And in the court of law, evidence is worth more than any painting. I wiped a smudge of dirt from my cheek and checked the time. Step 1 was complete. Now it was time to watch him dig the hole even deeper. Back inside the house, the atmosphere had shifted from a party to a war room. The guests had filtered out, leaving only the hardcore hangers-on and Dante's inner circle. I switched camera feeds on my laptop, watching as Dante led Gavin into the study. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The cell. Dante poured Gavin another glass of scotch, filling it to the brim. He placed a thick stack of documents on the mahogany desk. The paper was not legal bond. It looked cheap and ominous. "Listen, Brother Dante," said, his voice smooth like oil. "The crypto market waits for no one. Omnicoin is spiking right now. If we wait for the probate courts to clear the check tomorrow, we lose the entry point. We lose millions in potential profit." Gavin swayed slightly, holding onto the desk for support. He looked at the papers, trying to focus his blurred vision. "So what do we do?" he asked, slurring his words. "I do not have the liquidity until 10 a.m. tomorrow." Dante smiled, a predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine, even through a grainy screen. "I have a friend. A private lender. He specializes in bridge loans for high-net-worth individuals like yourself. He is willing to front you $10 million tonight. You just need to sign this promissory note pledging the estate assets as collateral." I zoomed in on the document. The interest rate was predatory. The terms were draconian. But the worst part was the collateral clause. It listed the mansion, the art collection, and the entire trust fund. Gavin was not just borrowing money, he was signing away his life. But Gavin did not read the fine print. He did not ask about the lender's background. He only saw the dollar signs dancing in his head. He saw himself as a billionaire genius, not a mark in a con game. "Easy," Gavin said, grabbing a gold pen. "It is just for 12 hours. Once Henderson wires the 33 million, I will pay this guy back and keep the crypto profits. It is free money. Do not do it, Gavin. I whispered to my empty motel room. For once in your life, use your brain. But he didn't. He scribbled his signature across the bottom line with a flourish. Done, he announced, slamming the pen down. Make the trade, Dante. Make me the richest man in Seattle. Dante snatched the papers up quicker than a cobra strikes. Consider it done, he said, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. You just made history, Gavin. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was done. Gavin had just committed fraud on a massive scale. He had pledged assets he did not own to secure a loan he could not repay for an investment that did not exist. He had just turned a $33 million inheritance into a potential prison sentence and total bankruptcy. I saved the recording and closed my laptop. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the sun to rise and watch the steel jaws snap shut. Tomorrow was going to be a bloodbath. The bathroom of the gas station on 4th Avenue smelled of bleach and old oil. It was 6:45 in the morning. I stood in front of the hand dryer holding my navy blue Armani suit jacket under the hot air. This suit used to be my armor when I walked into boardrooms to audit Fortune 500 companies. Now it was wrinkled from being stuffed in a gym bag. I used my hands to smooth out the creases, pulling the fabric tight until the heat relaxed the fibers. I was not going to walk into that law firm looking like a victim. I was going to walk in looking like a CEO. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at the cracked mirror. The dark circles under my eyes were still there, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I applied a layer of red lipstick. It was the only makeup I had left. It was war paint. I put the jacket on. It fit perfectly. I straightened my collar, picked up my battered laptop bag, and walked out of the restroom, leaving the homeless widow behind. The Henderson law firm was located in a glass skyscraper that pierced the cloudy Seattle sky. I parked my car 3 blocks away to avoid the valet charges and walked the rest of the distance. The wind bit at my face, but I did not shiver. As I pushed through the revolving doors into the marble lobby, the smell of money and expensive coffee hit me. And then I saw them. Gavin and Dante were standing near the reception desk. They looked like caricatures of success. Gavin was wearing a tuxedo which was completely inappropriate for a morning meeting, but perfect for his narcissism. He looked hungover. His skin was pale and he was sweating slightly, but he was trying to hide it behind a pair of dark sunglasses. Dante was laughing loudly at something on his phone, probably checking the crypto charts that were about to crash. Gavin spotted me first. He nudged Dante, and they both turned to watch me approach. Gavin lowered his sunglasses, looking me up and down with a sneer of disgust. He sniffed the air dramatically. "Eau de public restroom," he said loud enough for the receptionist to hear. "You look terrible, Audrey. What are you doing here? Did you come to beg for some spare change before I kick you out of the city entirely? I honestly thought you would have the dignity to leave town by now." I stopped 3 feet away from him. I stood tall. My hands relaxed at my sides. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I looked at him with the same detached clinical interest I used to have when analyzing a fraudulent tax return. "I am not here for money, Gavin," I said, my voice steady and calm. Gavin laughed, a harsh, sparking sound. "Then why are you here?" "To apologize, to beg me to take you back as a maid." I took 1 step closer, invading his personal space. I lowered my voice to a whisper that was colder than the rain outside. "No, I am here to watch you die." Gavin's smile faltered. For a split second I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He blinked, stepping back involuntarily, but his ego quickly took back control. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You are pathetic. Enjoy the show then. Because in 10 minutes I will be a king and you will be nothing." He spun around and marched toward the elevators, Dante trailing behind him like a loyal dog. I watched them go, clutching my briefcase tighter. Inside were the hard drives, the videos, and the trust statutes. He thought he was walking to a coronation. He was walking to a slaughter. I smoothed my jacket, took a deep breath, and followed them into the lion's den. The conference room on the 42nd floor was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline and a mahogany table long enough to land a small plane on. But the air of dignity was completely ruined by the two men sitting on the left side. Gavin was sprawled out in a leather chair, his muddy dress shoes resting directly on the polished wood of the table. He was picking his teeth with a business card, looking bored and arrogant. Next to him, Dante was blatantly ignoring the no-smoking sign on the wall. He had lit a thick cigar and was blowing clouds of acrid gray smoke toward the ceiling. He was not using an ashtray. Instead, he was flicking the ash onto the expensive carpet, treating the law firm like a cheap dive bar. The room smelled of stale tobacco and unearned confidence. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the table. He was an old-school lawyer, a man who respected tradition and decorum. His face was a mask of professional stone, but I could see the vein in his temple throbbing as he watched Dante ash on the floor. He looked like a man who was holding back a tidal wave of fury. When I walked in, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, the dynamic in the room shifted. Mr. Henderson looked up. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply locked eyes with me and gave a microscopic nod. It was a gesture so small that Gavin missed it entirely, but to me it screamed volumes. It meant that everything was ready. It meant that the trap was set and the trigger was waiting for my finger. I pulled out the chair opposite Gavin and sat down. I placed my laptop bag on the table with a heavy thud. I did not open it yet. I just folded my hands and waited. Gavin let out a dramatic sigh, checking his Rolex again. Finally, he groaned, dropping his feet from the table with a loud bang. "Can we get this over with, Henderson? I have a dealership to get to, and Dante has a crypto empire to run. Just hand over the check and the keys so we can get out of here. I am allergic to poor people, and my ex-wife is starting to contaminate the air." Dante laughed, blowing a smoke ring in my direction. "Yeah, come on, old man. Read the paper. Make it official. We have got big moves to make today." Mr. Henderson slowly adjusted his glasses. He opened the thick leather binder in front of him. His movements were deliberate and agonizingly slow. He was savoring this. He looked at Gavin over the rim of his spectacles. "I would suggest you extinguish that cigar, Mr. Dante," he said, his voice dry as parchment. "And Mr. Gavin, I would suggest you take your feet off the furniture, because in exactly 5 minutes you are going to wish you had shown a little more respect to the man who wrote this document." Gavin rolled his eyes, but he sat up slightly, sensing the shift in tone. "Just read the will, Henderson. Stop stalling, mister." Henderson cleared his throat and began to read. The room went silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat, which was steady and slow. The execution had begun. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again. The sound was dry and sharp, cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. He looked down at the document, his face completely void of emotion. "I, Thomas, hereby bequeath my entire estate, including the residential property located at Blackwood Lane, and liquid assets totaling $33 million to my son-in-law, Gavin." Before the lawyer could even finish the sentence, Gavin erupted. He shot up from his chair, knocking it backwards so hard it slammed against the glass wall. "Yes," he screamed, throwing his hands in the air. "Boom! That is what I am talking about. Did you hear that, Henderson? Did you hear that, Audrey?" He grabbed Dante by the shoulders and shook him violently. "We are rich, brother. We are filthy rich. The McLaren is mine. The crypto is funded. We are going to run this city." Dante was laughing, clapping his hands and shouting obscenities of joy. They looked like two frat boys who had just won a beer pong tournament, not two grown men discussing a funeral inheritance. Gavin spun around to face me. His eyes were wild with adrenaline and greed. He leaned over the table, placing his palms flat on the wood. "Look at you," he sneered. "Sitting there so quiet. Where is that arrogance now, Audrey? Where is that superior attitude? My father-in-law knew the truth. He knew you were weak. He knew you could not handle money. That is why he gave it to the man of the house." He pointed a finger right in my face. "You are nothing now. You are a guest in my world. I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your miserable life. The moment you realize that nobody loves you. Not me. And clearly not even your daddy. Now get out of my sight before I have security throw you out of the building." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I stared right into his dilated pupils. I saw the sweat on his forehead. I saw the desperate need for validation. He wanted me to cry. He wanted me to scream or beg or break down, but I gave him absolutely nothing. I sat as still as a statue, my breathing even and controlled. My silence infuriated him more than any insult could have. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "Show some respect to your landlord." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again. It was louder this time. He had not closed the binder. He had not taken off his glasses. He was simply waiting for the noise to stop. "Sit down, Mr. Gavin," he said quietly. Gavin laughed nervously. "Why should I sit down? I am done here. I am leaving to spend my money." Mr. Henderson looked up. His eyes were cold as ice. "You are not done, sir. I have not finished reading the sentence. Please sit down." The tone was so authoritative that Gavin actually paused. He looked confused. He looked at Dante, who shrugged. Slowly, reluctantly, Gavin pulled his chair back up and sat down. "What is left to read?" he muttered. "The tax stuff. Just skip it." Mr. Henderson adjusted the page. "No, sir. This is not tax stuff. This is the condition. And I suggest you listen very carefully." The room went silent again. But this time the silence was heavy. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging in the air, waiting to drop. However, Mr. Henderson said the word loudly, emphasizing it like a judge slamming a gavel. The single word hung in the air instantly, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Gavin stopped laughing. Dante froze mid-puff, his cigar hovering halfway to his mouth. However, the lawyer continued, his eyes locking onto Gavin with intense scrutiny. "The transfer of said assets, including the $33 million in liquid capital and the residential estate, is not direct. These assets are hereby permanently assigned to the Thomas Family Asset Protection Trust." Gavin blinked, his face twisting in confusion. "What the hell does that mean? Trust, direct, who cares about the legal mumbo-jumbo? Just tell me when the money hits my account." Mr. Henderson closed the binder with a final thud. "That is precisely the point, Mr. Gavin. The money will never hit your personal account. You are not the owner of these assets. You are merely listed as a conditional beneficiary." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the blood drain from Gavin's face. He looked at Dante, who was frantically typing on his phone under the table, likely trying to Google what a conditional beneficiary was. "Let me explain this in terms you might understand," Mr. Henderson said, leaning forward. "You do not own the house. The trust owns the house. You do not own the $33 million. The trust owns the money. You effectively own nothing. You are simply a person who is allowed to receive an allowance from the trust provided you meet specific criteria." Gavin stood up again, but this time there was no triumph in his posture, only panic. "Allowance. I am not a child. I am a grown man. I promised $10 million to an investor today. I put a deposit down on a car. I need access to that capital immediately." Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. "I am afraid that is impossible. The trust is a separate legal entity. It does not exist to fund your gambling habits or your speculative investments. It exists to preserve the legacy of Thomas Wilson. And the trust has very strict rules about how funds are distributed." I could see the gears turning in Gavin's head. The realization was crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had spent money he did not have. He had borrowed $10 million against collateral he did not legally possess. "This is a mistake," Gavin stammered, his voice rising an octave. "The old man liked me. He would not do this. There must be a way to dissolve the trust. I want to cash out." "You cannot cash out something you do not control," Mr. Henderson replied calmly. "And as for the control, that brings us to the most important part of the will, the appointment of the trustee. Because you see, Mr. Gavin, a trust is like a car. It needs a driver. And you are definitely not in the driver's seat." "Who is the driver then?" Gavin demanded, standing up again. "Is it you, Henderson? Because if it is, I am sure we can come to an arrangement. I will double your fees. Just sign the checks and stay out of my way." Henderson smiled. It was a cold, professional smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am not the trustee, Mr. Gavin. I am merely the facilitator. The trustee was appointed by Mr. Thomas himself 10 years ago. He chose a person he trusted with his life and his legacy. A person he knew possessed the financial acumen to spot a fraud from a mile away and the integrity to protect the family name. Gavin waved his hand impatiently. Who is it? The bank? A corporate board? A corporate. Just give me a name so I can call them and get this money released. Henderson looked directly at Gavin. Then he slowly turned his head to look at me. He spoke one word clearly and deliberately. Audrey. The air left the room instantly. It was a total vacuum. Gavin froze. His mouth was half open, ready to shout another insult, but the sound died in his throat. He blinked once, then twice, trying to process the word he had just heard. He looked at Henderson, hoping it was a joke. Then he looked at me. I was not looking at the floor anymore. I was leaning back in my chair, staring right at him. I raised my eyebrows slightly as if to say, "Go on, keep talking." Next to him, Dante went rigid. The expensive Cuban cigar he had been puffing on slipped from his fingers. It hit the mahogany table with a soft thud and rolled off the edge onto the carpet, burning a hole in the expensive wool. Dante did not notice. He did not move to pick it up. He was staring at me with pure, unadulterated horror. "You are joking," Gavin whispered. His voice was no longer a shout, it was a tremble. "You cannot be serious. Her. She is the trustee. She is the one I have to ask for money." Henderson nodded. "Sole trustee. Irrevocable. Meaning she has absolute veto power over every single penny. She decides when you get paid. She decides if you get paid. And most importantly, she decides if you are in breach of the trust moral clauses." Gavin sank back into his chair. He looked like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. He looked at his hands, then at the McLaren brochure on the table. The reality was setting in. He had just spent 3 days abusing, trying to destroy, and publicly humiliating the only person in the world who could sign his paycheck. The room was silent, but in my head I could hear the sound of the trap snapping shut. Mr. Henderson slid the heavy brass trustee seal across the polished mahogany table. It made a low, scraping sound that echoed in the silent room. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, but this time it sounded like a gavel striking a block. I picked up the seal. It was cold and heavy in my hand. It felt like justice. I opened the folder that I had placed on the table earlier. I did not look at Gavin. I looked at the document in front of me. I began to read, my voice clear and unwavering. According to the Good Steward Clause specific provision C regarding moral conduct, the beneficiary must demonstrate a commitment to family unity and ethical behavior. Any action deemed malicious or harmful to a family member constitutes a direct breach of the trust agreement. I finally looked up. Gavin was pale, his mouth slightly open. I continued, locking eyes with him. 3 days ago, Gavin, you physically removed me from my home during a storm. You poured wine on me. You denied me access to my personal belongings, and you left me with no financial resources. You did this while laughing. You did this to the daughter of the man whose money you are desperate to spend. Gavin stammered, trying to find words. That was a misunderstanding. We were stressed. It was a marital dispute. It has nothing to do with the money. It has everything to do with the money, I interrupted. My father defined family as the ultimate asset. By attacking me, you attacked the trust. You proved you are not a good steward. You proved you are a liability. I uncapped the pen. The sound was sharp. I pulled the distribution schedule toward me. This document outlined the monthly stipend Gavin was expecting. $10,000 a month for living expenses, plus the lump sum he thought he was getting. I drew a thick, dark line through the numbers. Then I wrote a new number in the margin. 0. I stamped the document with the trustee's seal. The red ink looked like a wound on the white paper. I turned the document around and slid it toward him. Effective immediately, your access to the Thomas Family Trust is suspended pending a full ethical review, I declared. Your monthly allowance is 0. Your access to the emergency funds is denied. You will not receive a single cent until I decide you have learned how to be a human being again. And judging by your performance today, that review could take years. Dante looked at the paper, then at Gavin. 0, he whispered. You have got to be kidding me. We have 10 million due in 12 hours, Gavin. You cannot have zero. Gavin stared at the red stamp. His hands were shaking violently. You cannot do this, he rasped. I have bills. I have the car deposit. I have the loan. I closed my folder. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. And since you made it very clear that I am no longer your wife, I am afraid I no longer care about your personal problems. I watched Gavin stare at the paper where I had written zero. He looked like a man trying to comprehend a foreign language. But I was not finished yet. The financial cut was just the tourniquet. Now it was time for the amputation. I reached into my leather folder one last time and pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal paper. It was the property deed for the mansion. Now let us discuss your living arrangements, I said, my voice slicing through the silence. As Mr. Henderson explained, the estate at Blackwood Lane is held by a limited liability company under the umbrella of the trust. It is not a private residence owned by you. It is a corporate asset. Gavin looked up, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. So what? I live there. It is my home. You cannot just kick me out. I opened the deed to page 7. Actually, I can. Clause 7. A regarding occupancy clearly states that the beneficiary may reside in the property only as long as they maintain the asset in pristine condition. I turned my laptop around to face him. I pressed play on the video I had recorded from Dante's livestream just 2 nights ago. The video showed the chaotic party. It showed people dancing on the antique coffee table. It showed Dante ashing his cigar on the Persian rug. It showed Gavin spilling champagne on the silk drapes. I saw the live stream, Gavin, I said, pointing at the screen. Cigarette burns on the rugs. Alcohol spilled on antique furniture. Unauthorized guests destroying historical property. You are not maintaining the asset. You are devaluing it. You are treating a $10 million estate like a frat house. Therefore, as trustee, I am revoking your right of occupancy effective immediately. Gavin jumped up, knocking his chair over. You cannot do this, he screamed. Where am I supposed to go? All my stuff is there. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. You have exactly 60 minutes, I said calmly. You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. You can take your clothes and your personal toiletries. Anything bought with trust money stays. The furniture stays. The art stays. And the car keys stay. Gavin looked at me with pure hatred. And if I don't leave? What are you going to do, Audrey? Drag me out. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all morning. No, Gavin. I will not drag you out. If you are not off the property by noon, I will call the police. I will show them this deed and my authority as trustee. I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. I leaned forward, my face just inches from his. Does that sound familiar, Gavin? It should. It is exactly what you said to me 3 days ago in the rain. The only difference is that I have the actual law on my side, so I suggest you start running. Tick-tock. For a moment, Gavin stood frozen. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like an avalanche. He was homeless, he was penniless, and he was being evicted by the woman he had discarded. The humiliation was too much for his fragile ego to handle. His face turned a deep, violent shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged. You witch, he screamed. You stole this from me. That is my house. That is my money. He lunged across the table. His hands were clawed, reaching for my throat. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the voice of authority that had just stripped him naked. But he never made it. 2 large security guards who had been waiting just outside the door burst into the room. Mr. Henderson had anticipated this. He knew exactly what kind of man Gavin was. The guards grabbed Gavin by the arms, slamming him back into his chair. One of them pressed a heavy hand onto his shoulder, pinning him down. Gavin thrashed and kicked, knocking over the pitcher of water soaking the expensive carpet. Get off me, he roared. Do you know who I am? I am the heir. I own this building. I did not flinch. I did not move back. I just watched him struggle, his tuxedo now disheveled and wet. No, Gavin, I said softly. You are a liability. And liabilities get liquidated. While Gavin was screaming, Dante was having a different kind of breakdown. He wasn't looking at Gavin. He was looking at his phone, his eyes wide with terror. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Wait a minute!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Wait a damn minute! What do you mean $0? What do you mean his assets are frozen?" He turned to Gavin, ignoring the guards. "You told me you had the money, Gavin. You signed the promissory note. You pledged the assets." Gavin stopped struggling. He looked at Dante with wild eyes. "Shut up, Dante. Not now." "No, I will not shut up," Dante screamed. "I just transferred $10 million of my own leverage based on your signature. I borrowed from the sharks, Gavin. Real sharks. People who do not sue you, they bury you. If that money does not clear in 2 hours, I am a dead man. And so are you." The room went deadly silent. Even the guards looked surprised. I looked from Dante to Gavin, a slow smile spreading across my face. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You took out a loan, a $10 million loan, and you used the trust assets as collateral." Gavin looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. Dante was hyperventilating, pacing back and forth. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Well, gentlemen," I said, "it seems we have moved past simple family drama. We have now entered the territory of federal fraud. And I think I'm going to enjoy this part the most." Gavin tried to laugh it off, but it sounded like a choke. "You are bluffing," he stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You do not have anything on me. I have not done anything illegal. I just borrowed some money. That is just bad business, not fraud." I shook my head slowly. "You are right, Gavin. Borrowing money is not a crime, but selling property that does not belong to you to fund that loan is." I turned my laptop screen toward him again. I opened a new video file. It was the footage from yesterday morning. The high-definition video showed everything clearly. The black van, the vulture, the paintings being loaded into the back, and most damning of all, the metal briefcase full of cash being handed to Gavin. The room went deadly silent. Gavin stared at the screen, his eyes bulging. Dante stopped pacing and leaned in to watch. On the video, Gavin's voice was crystal clear, saying, "There was no paper trail." I hit pause on the frame where Gavin was holding the cash. "Do you recognize this transaction, Gavin? Because the FBI certainly will. You sold 5 pieces of mid-century modern art from the estate library. You sold them for $500,000 in cash to a known fence." "That was my art," Gavin shouted. "It was in my house." "Wrong," I corrected him, my voice sharp as a whip. "That art is listed in the trust inventory as assets of the Thomas Wilson Limited Liability Company. It is corporate property. By selling it without trustee approval and keeping the cash for yourself, you did not just steal from your family. You stole from a corporation." I looked at Mr. Henderson, who nodded in agreement. "That is correct," Mr. Henderson added. "Under federal law, that constitutes embezzlement of corporate assets and grand larceny in the first degree given the value of the items. We are talking about a Class B felony, Gavin. Mandatory prison time." Gavin looked at the lawyer, then back at me. His arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the terrified look of a trapped animal. I can get them back," he whispered. "I can call the guy. I can return the money." I closed the laptop with a snap. "It is too late for that. The crime has already been committed. You sold assets you did not own to pay for a lifestyle you cannot afford, and you did it all on camera. I am not just cutting off your allowance, Gavin. I am preparing to hand this evidence over to the district attorney. You wanted to be a big shot. Congratulations. You are about to become the most famous inmate in the state penitentiary. But the art theft is just the appetizer, Gavin. Let us talk about the main course. The $10 million. Gavin flinched as if I had physically slapped him. He looked over at Dante, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive suit clinging to his shaking frame. I clicked the next file on my laptop. It was a high-resolution photograph of the promissory note Gavin had signed only hours ago. The signature was bold and reckless. The terms were clear, and the collateral section was highlighted in bright yellow. "You really should read before you sign," I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. "Right here in Section C, You pledged the Blackwood estate and the entirety of the Thomas Wilson Trust as security for a high-interest private loan. So what? Gavin spat, trying to regain some ground. I would have paid it back tomorrow. It is a bridge loan. People do it all the time. People who own their assets do it, I corrected him. But you do not own the assets, Gavin. You do not hold the title to the house. You do not hold the keys to the vault. By representing yourself as the owner to a lender in order to secure funds, you have committed mortgage fraud and larceny by false pretense. I looked at Mr. Henderson. How much time does that carry, counselor? Mr. Henderson did not even look up from his notes. For a sum of $10 million involving interstate wire transfers, we are looking at up to 30 years in federal prison and fines of up to $1 million. And that is assuming the private lenders do not get to him before the FBI does. Dante let out a low moan and slumped into his chair. He knew exactly who those lenders were. They were not the kind of people who filed lawsuits. They were the kind of people who broke kneecaps. You lied on a financial application, Gavin. I continued relentlessly. You used my father's legacy as a bargaining chip in your gambling addiction. You defrauded a lender. And since you used the internet to facilitate the transaction, you also committed wire fraud. Gavin looked at the screen, then at his hands. They were trembling uncontrollably. I didn't know, he whispered. I thought it was mine. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, I said, closing the file. You were so desperate to look rich that you became a criminal. You wanted to impress your friends. You wanted to impress Dante. Well, congratulations, Gavin. You have certainly made an impression. You have managed to rack up 3 federal indictments before lunch. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city he thought he was going to rule. You are not just broke, Gavin. You are a felon in the making. And the worst part is you did it all for nothing. Because that $10 million you borrowed, you can't even access it to pay it back because I just froze the accounts it was transferred into. You are trapped in a cage of your own making. I plugged the HDMI cable into my laptop. The giant screen behind me flickered to life, displaying a spreadsheet that I had prepared for this exact moment. It was a simple balance sheet, but the numbers on it were catastrophic. I picked up a laser pointer. The red dot danced on the screen like a sniper's target, finally resting on the first column. Let us do the math, Gavin, I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. You walked in here thinking you had a net worth of positive $33 million. Let us see where you actually stand. I clicked the remote. The first number appeared in bright red. Negative $20 million. Item 1, I explained. The predatory loan you just signed with Dante's friends. You borrowed $10 million. But if you read the default clause on page 40, which you triggered the moment you were proven to not own the collateral, the principal doubles immediately plus legal fees. You owe the Sharks $20 million as of right now. Gavin gasped, clutching his chest. That is illegal, he wheezed. I clicked the remote again. Another red number appeared. Negative $15 million. Item 2. Civil theft of corporate art. The paintings were valued at $5 million. Under state law, theft of trust assets allows for treble damages, meaning you have to pay back 3 times the value. That is another $15 million you owe to the trust. Gavin was shaking his head violently, his eyes watering. Stop it. Please stop. I did not stop. I clicked the remote a third time. The largest number yet appeared. Negative $39 million. Item 3. The poison pill clause. My father inserted this specifically for you, Gavin. It states that if any beneficiary attempts to defraud the trust or pledge its assets for personal debt, they are liable for a penalty equal to the total value of the estate plus interest. I hit the sum button. The final number flashed on the screen in a font size so large it seemed to crush him. Negative $74 million. I turned to face him. The math is undeniable, Gavin. You do not have $33 million. You have a debt of $74 million. You are not a millionaire. You are destitute. You are in a hole so deep that you could work for 1,000 years and never see the sun. Gavin looked at the screen, then at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone. The swagger was gone. All that was left was a small, terrified man who realized he had just bet his life against the house and lost everything. Even Dante looked away, unable to witness the magnitude of the destruction. I closed my laptop with a satisfying click. "The audit is complete," I said, "and you have failed." Gavin slumped back into the leather chair. He looked small. The tuxedo that had looked so sharp an hour ago now seemed like a costume for a clown. He loosened his tie, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly run out of oxygen. $74 million. It was a number so large it was abstract. But the handcuffs that were waiting for him were very real. He looked at Dante for help, but Dante was busy deleting apps from his phone and sweating through his shirt. The rats were already trying to abandon the sinking ship. Gavin looked back at me. His eyes were filled with tears. Not tears of remorse, tears of self-pity. "Audrey, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You cannot let this happen. I will go to jail. I will die in there." I stood up slowly, gathering my files. I packed the laptop. I picked up the heavy brass trustee seal and placed it in my bag. I smoothed down my suit jacket. I looked at the man I had once vowed to love and cherish. I searched my heart for a single drop of sympathy. I found none. All I found was the memory of him pouring wine on my head in the rain. All I found was the image of him selling my mother's art to a criminal. "You should have thought about that before you treated your family like an ATM, Gavin," I said. "You wanted the lifestyle of a billionaire. Well, now you have the debts of one." I walked toward the door. The sound of my heels clicking on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. I stopped with my hand on the brass handle and turned back one last time. "You asked for a new life, Gavin. You wanted to be free of me. You wanted to be independent. Well, you got your wish. You are free. You are single, and you are about to have a very long time to think about your choices in a federal cell." Gavin put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of a man who realized too late that he was never the player, only the pawn. I opened the door. The reception area was bright and busy, unaware of the destruction that had just taken place inside. I looked back at the sobbing figure one last time. "Welcome to hell, darling," I whispered. I walked out, leaving the door open behind me. The cool air of the hallway felt like freedom. I had walked in as a victim. I was walking out as the victor. But I was not done yet. The legal destruction was complete, but the personal reckoning was just beginning. As I pressed the elevator button, I checked my watch. Gavin had 40 minutes left to vacate the mansion, and I intended to be there to watch every second of it. The revolving doors of the Henderson law firm spun behind me, depositing me onto the busy sidewalk of 4th Avenue. The Seattle drizzle had turned into a steady rain, but I did not open my umbrella. The cold water felt cleansing. It washed away the stale air of the conference room and the suffocating scent of Gavin's cologne. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of wet concrete and exhaust. For the first time in years, I felt light. I felt clean. But the silence did not last. The heavy glass doors slammed open again violently. I heard frantic footsteps slapping against the wet pavement. "Audrey, wait. Please, just wait." I did not stop walking. I clutched my bag tighter and kept my eyes forward. I had a schedule to keep. I had an eviction to oversee. "Audrey, stop." A hand grabbed my arm. It was desperate and clammy. I spun around, ready to defend myself, but what I saw stopped me cold. Gavin, the man who had spent the last 3 days parading around like a king, was now on his knees. Right there in the middle of the sidewalk, with pedestrians stepping around us and cars honking in the street, he collapsed. He wrapped his arms around my legs, hugging my shins. His expensive tuxedo trousers soaked up the dirty rainwater from the sidewalk. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes were wide and frantic. He looked like a man drowning. "Get up, Gavin," I said, looking down at him with distaste. "You are making a scene. People are staring. Let them stare," he sobbed, tightening his grip on my legs. "I do not care. I only care about you, Audrey. You have to listen to me. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But it wasn't me. It was Dante." He looked up at me, water dripping from his nose. "It was Dante's idea. He tricked me, Audrey. He told me the crypto was safe. He told me the loan was just a formality. I did not know. I swear on my mother's grave, I did not know he was going to leverage the estate. I am a victim here, just like you. I looked at the top of his head. He was lying. Even now at rock bottom, he was still trying to con me. He was still trying to shift the blame. You are the trustee. He continued, his voice rising in hysteria. You have the power, Audrey. You hold the seal. You can wipe the debt. You can void the penalty clause. You can tell Henderson it was all a misunderstanding. Just sign a paper and this $74 million nightmare goes away. He pressed his face against my coat. We can start over, baby. Just you and me. Like the old days before the money got in the way. We can kick Dante out. We can live in the house together. I will be better. I promise I will be the husband you deserve. Just please do not send me to jail. Do not let them take everything. A crowd had gathered. Businessmen in trench coats and tourists with umbrellas were watching the spectacle. They saw a broken man begging a cold woman. They did not know the history. They did not know about the abuse or the theft. They just saw his tears. But I saw the truth. He did not want me. He wanted a pardon. He wanted his ATM back. I looked down at the man clutching my ankles like a drowning sailor. The rain was falling harder now, soaking his hair and mixing with the tears on his face. He looked pathetic. He looked small. It was hard to believe that just 72 hours ago this same man had stood over me like a giant and kicked me out of my own home. I stepped back one deliberate step at a time, peeling his fingers off my raincoat. I did not use force. I used disdain. He felt my resistance and his grip slackened. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for a shred of the woman who used to forgive him for everything. He was looking for the old Audrey, but she was gone. You are right, Gavin, I said, my voice low and even. I am the trustee. I hold the pen. I hold the seal. I could snap my fingers and classify the art theft as a misunderstanding. I could reclassify the loan as a family investment. I could make the $74 million debt disappear and let you start over. Hope flared in his eyes. A desperate, jagged hope. He started to smile, a trembling, relieved smile. Yes, he breathed. Yes, do it, baby. Please. For us. I leaned down close to his ear. My lips brushed against his cold, wet skin. I lowered my voice to a whisper that cut through the noise of the traffic and the rain. I could save you, Gavin. But I choose not to. He froze. The smile died on his lips. Do you want to know why I whispered? It is not because of the money. It is not even because of the cheating. It is because of the wine. Do you remember the wine, Gavin? Do you remember the rain? Do you remember laughing while I cried over my father's coffin? You humiliated me when I was at my lowest point. You kicked me when I was down. You showed me exactly who you are. And now I am showing you exactly who I am. I straightened up, towering over him. I reached into my bag one last time. My hand closed around a damp, wrinkled document. It was the divorce settlement. The same papers he had thrown at me 3 days ago, demanding I sign them so he could be free to enjoy his inheritance. I pulled out the papers and held them up. The rain spotted the ink, but the signature was clear. It was bold and final. You wanted your freedom so badly, Gavin, I said. You wanted me out of your life so you could be with your real friends. You wanted to be independent. Well, here it is. I dropped the papers onto his chest. They landed with a wet slap, sliding down his ruined tuxedo. I signed them this morning while I was waiting for the elevator, I said. You are officially single. You have no wife to bail you out. You have no father-in-law to protect you. You are alone. Gavin stared at the papers in horror. He reached for them, his hands shaking, but I was already turning away. I did not look back at the sobbing man on the sidewalk. I did not look back at the life I was leaving behind. I opened my umbrella, the black silk snapping open with a satisfying sound. Goodbye, Gavin, I said, walking into the rain. Enjoy the rest of your life. Try not to drop the soap. I walked toward my car, leaving him kneeling in the puddle, a king without a crown, a husband without a wife, and a man without a future. The war was over, and I had won. I watched from the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. But the drama on the sidewalk was far from over. In fact, the finale was just beginning. Dante pushed through the revolving doors of the law firm, stepping out onto the wet pavement. He was dry safe under the building's awning, while Gavin knelt in the rain, clutching the divorce papers like a lifeline. Dante looked down at his brother-in-law. There was no brotherhood in his eyes. There was no sympathy. There was only the cold calculation of a parasite looking for a new host. He saw the wet papers. He saw the defeat in Gavin's posture. And he did the math instantly. Gavin was a sinking ship, and Dante had no intention of drowning with him. Dante pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He did not call a lawyer. He did not call a bail bondsman. He dialed 911. He held the phone to his ear, speaking loud enough for the gathering crowd and Gavin to hear. Yes, hello. I need to report a grand larceny in progress. I am at the Henderson Law Firm on 4th Avenue. My name is Dante. I want to turn in the perpetrator of the Wilson art heist. Yes, the paintings that were sold yesterday. Gavin's head snapped up. The rain dripped from his nose, but his eyes were wide with disbelief. He stared at the man he had called his brother, the man he had trusted with his fortune. It was Gavin Wilson. Dante continued, his voice smooth and practiced. He is the mastermind. He forced me to load the van. He made the deal with the fence. I have been trying to convince him to return the money, but he is refusing. He is right here. He is dangerous. Please send officers immediately. The betrayal hit Gavin harder than the bankruptcy. He scrambled to his feet, slipping on the wet concrete. Mud stained his knees. Rage replaced the sorrow in his face, a primal, animalistic rage. You snake, Gavin roared, lunging at Dante. You set me up. It was your idea. You introduced me to the vulture. You told me the crypto was a sure thing. Dante stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender for the benefit of the onlookers. Stay back, Gavin. I am just doing the right thing. I cannot let you get away with stealing from the family. Liar! Gavin screamed. He threw a wild haymaker punch. It connected with Dante's jaw with a sickening crack. Dante stumbled back, dropping his phone. The pretense of civility vanished. Dante tackled Gavin, wrapping his arms around his waist and driving him into the puddle near the gutter. The two men rolled on the ground in a tangle of expensive fabric and limbs. It was not a dignified fight. It was a brawl between two desperate rats in a trap. Gavin clawed at Dante's face, ripping his shirt. Dante punched Gavin in the ribs repeatedly. They splashed in the dirty water, grunting and cursing, screaming accusations at each other. Passers-by stopped to film the spectacle, the heir to the Wilson fortune and his business partner beating each other senseless in the street. Gavin got the upper hand, pinning Dante down. Tell them the truth, he shrieked, spitting blood. Tell them you stole the money. Dante laughed through a mouthful of broken teeth. It does not matter who stole it, Gavin. It only matters who signed the papers. And your name is on everything. You are the fall guy. You always were. Gavin raised his fist to strike again, but the sound of sirens cut through the air. Blue and red lights reflected off the wet pavement, illuminating the two fallen men. They were bruised, bloody, and broke, and they were about to find out that the only thing colder than the rain was a jail cell. The wail of sirens cut through the rain like a knife, drowning out the sounds of the brawl. Two police cruisers screeched to a halt at the curb, tires splashing dirty water onto the sidewalk. Uniformed officers swarmed the scene, moving with practiced efficiency. They did not ask questions. They saw two men fighting in the street, and they ended it with force. Gavin was hauled up by his collar, blood streaming from his nose, mixing with the rain on his chin. He tried to struggle, still blinded by rage and adrenaline. Get off me, he shouted, thrashing against the officer's grip. Arrest him. He is the thief. That is Dante. He stole my money. The officer slammed Gavin against the hood of the cruiser. The metal was cold and unforgiving against his cheek. He twisted his arm behind his back with a force that made Gavin gasp in pain. Gavin Wilson. The officer barked, his voice devoid of sympathy. You are under arrest. Gavin froze. The fight left his body instantly replaced by a chilling realization. Arrested. Me. No. You have the wrong guy. It is a civil matter. It is a misunderstanding. The officer kicked Gavin's legs apart and began to pat him down. We have a warrant issued by the district attorney based on digital evidence provided regarding the theft of corporate assets and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The handcuffs clicked. It was a sharp metallic sound that echoed louder than the thunder overhead. The steel bit into Gavin's wrists, locking tight, the symbol of his freedom being stripped away. Dante, who was being questioned by another officer a few feet away, pointed a shaking finger at Gavin. "That is him, officer. He is the one who signed the papers. He is the one who sold the art. I was just a witness." I tried to stop him. Gavin whipped his head around, his eyes wide with betrayal. "You liar!" he screamed, spitting blood. "You set me up!" The officer shoved Gavin toward the back door of the cruiser. "Get in the car!" As Gavin was forced toward the vehicle, he looked up. Through the rain and the flashing blue lights, he saw a car parked just down the street, a black sedan with the engine idling. The window was rolled down just an inch. He could not see the face inside, but he knew. He knew who was watching. He knew who had made the call. Audrey. The name tore from his throat, a desperate guttural scream. "Audrey, help me. Tell them, please. I am your husband. Do not let them take me." He struggled against the officer, twisting his body toward my car. His face was a mask of pure terror. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. All that was left was a frightened child realizing the dark is real. "Audrey," he screamed again, his voice cracking. "I love you. I am sorry. Audrey." The officer pushed his head down and shoved him into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his voice instantly. I watched through the rain-streaked glass as Gavin pressed his face against the window of the police car, mouthing my name one last time. But I did not roll down my window. I did not look back. I simply shifted my car into drive and pulled away, leaving the sirens and the ruins of my marriage in the rearview mirror. The silence in my car was beautiful. I pulled my car into a quiet side street and killed the engine. The rain drummed against the roof, a rhythmic applause for the performance I had just concluded. But there was one loose thread left. Dante. He thought that by turning Gavin in, he had saved his own skin. He thought he could spin the narrative and walk away with his reputation intact. He was wrong. I took out my phone and opened the social media app where Dante had live-streamed my humiliation just days ago. His video was still pinned to the top of his profile, gathering likes from sycophants who thought cruelty was comedy. I hit the create button. I did not use a filter. I did not fix my hair. I looked directly into the camera lens, my face pale and unsmiling. "I am Audrey Wilson," I said, my voice steady. "And this is the truth about the so-called empire my ex-husband and his partner claim to own." I uploaded the clips. I posted the video of Gavin and the vulture counting dirty cash in the driveway. I posted the screenshot of the trust clause showing Gavin had zero access to the funds. And finally, I posted the document showing Dante knowingly facilitating a fraudulent loan using assets he knew did not belong to him. I captioned it simply, "The receipts." I hit post. The reaction was instantaneous. The internet, which had mocked me as the discarded wife, suddenly found a new villain. The comments rolled in faster than I could read them. "Justice served. Look at those cowards. Dante is a fraud." The hashtag Team Audrey started trending within minutes, replacing the mocking memes with messages of support. People love a comeback story, but they love a public execution of arrogance even more. Across town, Dante sat in the back of an Uber trying to distance himself from the police station. He opened his phone, expecting to see praise for his quick thinking. Instead, he saw his world burning. His inbox was flooded with death threats. His investors for the Omnicoin project were demanding refunds, calling him a scammer. The public had turned on him, and in the world of crypto, reputation is everything. But the mean comments were the least of his problems. As he frantically tried to delete his account, a text message popped up at the top of his screen. It was from an unknown number. There were no words, just a picture. It was a photo of Dante getting into the Uber taken from across the street just seconds ago. Dante's blood ran cold. The private lenders, the sharks, they were not on social media to like or comment. They were watching the news. They had seen my post. They knew the collateral was fake. They knew the $10 million was gone frozen by the trustee. and they knew exactly where Dante was. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. We saw the video. The collateral is void. We want the principal back plus the penalty. You have 1 hour, or we come for the interest. Dante screamed at the driver to drive faster, his voice cracking with terror. He looked out the rear window, expecting to see a black SUV following him. The internet hated him, but the sharks wanted to kill him. He had helped destroy Gavin, but in doing so, he had painted a target on his own back. The hunt was on. The silence that descended upon the Blackwood estate was heavy and absolute. The flashing blue lights of the police cruisers had faded into the distance, taking the chaos and the shouting with them. The rain had stopped, leaving the driveway slick and black under the moonlight. I stood alone at the open front door, holding the heavy iron key that Gavin had tried so desperately to keep. I walked inside. The house smelled of stale champagne and expensive cologne, a lingering ghost of the party that had destroyed my marriage. I stepped over a shattered wine glass in the foyer, the shards crunching beneath my heels. This place was supposed to be a sanctuary. My father had bought it to be a fortress for his family. But as I walked through the grand hallway passing the portraits of ancestors who would have been ashamed of what happened here, I realized something profound. A house is not a home when the foundation is rotten. I went into the library. The walls were bare where the paintings used to hang. The pale rectangles on the wallpaper looked like scars. I ran my hand over the empty space. This room used to smell of old paper and pipe tobacco. Now it smelled of betrayal. I sat in my father's leather chair, the same one Gavin had lounged in like a conqueror just hours ago. I looked around at the mahogany shelves and the velvet drapes. I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no warmth, just a cold clinical assessment of assets. As the trustee, I had a duty to protect the value of the estate, but I also had the power to liquidate it. Keeping this house would mean keeping the memories. It would mean walking past the spot where Gavin proposed. It would mean sleeping in the room where I found out he was cheating. It would mean constantly repairing the damage he and Dante had caused. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the most aggressive real estate agent in Seattle. She answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "Elena, it is Audrey Wilson. I want to list the Blackwood estate." There was a pause on the other end. "Audrey, are you sure?" I heard about everything. Maybe you should wait until the dust settles." "I do not want the dust to settle," I said, my voice echoing in the empty room. "I want to sweep it out. I want to list it immediately. As is, fully furnished. I want it sold to the highest bidder by the end of the month. I do not care who buys it. A tech mogul, a developer, bulldoze it for all I care. Just get it off my books." "But Audrey, the market is soft right now," Elena warned. "You might take a loss." I looked at the stain on the rug where Dante had spilled his drink. "It is not a loss, Elena. It is an amputation. Save the leg, lose the foot. Just sell it." The next morning I met with the police detective at the station to sign the release forms for the recovered property. The vulture had given up the paintings the moment the handcuffs clicked on his wrists. He was a businessman after all, and he knew when a deal had gone bad. The 5 mid-century modern masterpieces were leaning against the wall in the evidence room, wrapped in plastic. The detective looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "You are lucky, Mrs. Wilson. Usually these things disappear into a private collection in Europe within hours. We got them before they even left the van." I looked at the paintings. They were beautiful, vibrant, chaotic, and full of life. My mother had loved them. She used to say that art was the only thing that told the truth. But now when I looked at them, I didn't see the brushstrokes. I saw Gavin's greedy hands. I saw the transaction in the driveway. These paintings were evidence of a crime now. They were tainted. "I cannot take them back to the house," I told the detective. "I sold the house this morning." He raised an eyebrow. "So what do you want to do with them?" "Put them in storage." I shook my head. "Storage is for things you want to keep. I want to transform them." I contacted a legitimate auction house the same afternoon. I expedited the sale using my authority as trustee to bypass the usual waiting period. The story of the Wilson art heist had made the news, and the notoriety drove the price up. Collectors wanted the paintings that had almost been stolen by a socialite husband. It was twisted, but it was profitable. The gavel fell 3 days later. The total sum was $5.2 million. I held the check in my hands. It was a piece of paper, but it felt heavy. This was the money Gavin had tried to steal. This was the money he had destroyed his life for. It was blood money. And I knew exactly how to wash it clean. I drove to the other side of the city to a neighborhood that did not have gated driveways or manicured lawns. I pulled up in front of a nondescript brick building with a small sign that read, "The Artemis Shelter." It was a refuge for women and children escaping domestic violence. I had volunteered here once years ago, before Gavin had isolated me from my own life. The director, a stern woman named Sarah, looked up from her cluttered desk as I walked in. She recognized me immediately. The news cycle had been relentless. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, guarding her expression. "We have a policy against media here. If you are looking for a photo op, I am not here for photos." "Sarah," I interrupted, "I am here to make a deposit." I placed the check on her desk. She glanced at it dismissively at first, then she froze. She picked it up, her hands beginning to tremble. She counted the zeros. She looked at the signature line where I had signed as trustee. $5 million, she whispered. "Audrey, is this real?" "It is real," I said, taking a seat in the plastic chair opposite her. "It is the proceeds from the sale of my mother's art collection. My husband tried to steal it to buy a sports car. He tried to use it to erase me. I am using it to erase him." Sarah looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "Do you have any idea what this will do? We can build the new wing. We can hire lawyers for the women who can't afford them. We can save thousands of lives." "That is the point," I said. "My father's trust has a clause about being a good steward. For a long time I thought that meant hoarding the money, protecting it from the world. But I realized that was wrong. Being a good steward means using the power you have to fix what is broken." I stood up, walking over to the window that looked out onto the small playground where children were playing. They were safe here. They were free. "I want this money to go specifically to a legal defense fund," I told her. "For women who are being financially abused. For women whose husbands lock their credit cards and hide the assets. I want to make sure that no woman in this city ever has to sleep in her car because a man decided to cut her off." Sarah stood up and walked around the desk. She didn't shake my hand. She hugged me. It was a fierce, tight hug. The kind of hug that said more than any speech. "You are changing the world, Audrey," she whispered. I pulled back and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in weeks. "No, Sarah. I am just balancing the books." I walked out of the shelter into the bright afternoon sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the bank. The wire transfer from the house sale had cleared. The Blackwood estate was gone. The art was gone. The furniture, the clothes, the jewelry, it was all gone. I sat in my car and looked at the dashboard. I had no home. I had no husband. I had no collection of rare artifacts. I was 34 years old, and I was starting over from scratch. But as I turned the key in the ignition, I realized I was richer than I had ever been. I had my dignity. I had my freedom. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was. I was not a victim. I was not a wife. I was the trustee of my own destiny. And business was looking good. The rain in Seattle never really changes, but the way you look at it does. 1 year ago, the rain felt like a shroud, cold and heavy, drowning me in a parking lot while I counted quarters for a sandwich. Today, the rain against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office on the 35th floor looks like art. It is a shimmering curtain that separates me from the chaos below. I stood by the window holding a porcelain cup of steaming green tea, watching the city gray and busy. I was not cold, I was not hungry, and I was certainly not alone. I turned away from the view and walked to my desk. It was a slab of white marble, clean and sharp, totally unlike the heavy, dark mahogany of my father's old study. The nameplate on the door read, "Audrey Thomas, CEO of Ironclad Wealth Management." I had dropped the Wilson name the day the divorce was finalized, reclaiming my father's name and my own identity. My firm was small, exclusive, and ruthlessly efficient. We had one mission statement: to protect women from the financial violence I had endured. My assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, buzzed the intercom. "Mrs. Thomas, your 10 o'clock is here. It is Miss Sterling. She is the tech heiress I told you about." "Send her in, Leo," I said, smoothing the lapel of my cream-colored suit. The door opened and a young woman walked in. She was beautiful and wealthy, wearing a designer dress that cost more than most cars. But she had the look. That specific terrified deer in the headlights look that I knew so well. She was engaged to a man everyone loved. A man who was charming and charismatic. A man who said that prenuptial agreements were unromantic. "Please sit down, Maya," I said, gesturing to the velvet armchair opposite my desk. Maya sat down, clutching her purse tightly. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Thomas. Everyone says you are the best, but I feel silly being here. My fiancé, Mark, he is amazing. He is an artist. He says our love should be built on trust, not contracts. He says that if I sign a prenup, it means I am planning for failure." I smiled. It was a warm smile, but it had teeth. I opened a file on my desk. "Maya, I am going to tell you a story. There was a woman once who believed that too. She was smart. She had a master's degree. She thought her husband was her partner, so she let him handle the accounts. She let him sign the checks. She thought talking about money was tacky. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. One day her father died, and 3 days later that charming husband locked her out of her own house with $0 to her name. He sold her mother's heirlooms to pay for his gambling debts. He tried to leverage her entire inheritance for a scam. Maya's eyes widened. "That sounds like a horror movie." "It was my life," I said softly. "And it happened because I mistook vulnerability for intimacy." I slid a document across the marble desk. "This is not a plan for failure, Maya. This is a seatbelt. You do not put on a seatbelt because you plan to crash. You put it on because other people on the road are unpredictable." I picked up a gold pen and tapped the paper. "Mark is an artist. That is wonderful. But artists can have dry spells. Artists can have debts. If you marry him without this document, his debts become your debts. His liabilities become your liabilities. If he crashes the car, you go through the windshield with him." "Is that romantic?" Maya shook her head slowly. "No. That sounds reckless." "Exactly," I said. "True love is protecting your partner. If Mark loves you, he will want you to be safe. He will want you to be secure regardless of what happens to him. If he is offended by your need for security, then he is not interested in a partnership. He is interested in a sponsorship." Maya took a deep breath. Her shoulders relaxed. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a spark of understanding. "You are right. He threw a fit when I mentioned separate accounts. He said I was being cold." I nodded. "That is a red flag, Maya. A man who respects you will respect your boundaries. A man who wants to control you will try to tear them down. Sign the papers. Keep the trust in your name. Make him sign a waiver of spousal support. If he walks away because of a piece of paper, then he was never standing by you to begin with." Maya picked up the document. She looked at it, then at me. "You saved me a lot of heartache, didn't you?" "I saved you a fortune," I corrected her. "And I saved your dignity. That is worth more than the money." After she left, I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. My calendar was full. I had a lunch meeting with a senator who wanted to draft a bill making financial abuse a criminal offense. I had a video conference with a team of forensic accountants I had hired to track down hidden assets for a client in London. I was building an empire. Not one made of parties and champagne, but one made of steel and knowledge. I checked my phone. There was a news alert. The trial of Gavin Wilson and Dante Rossi had reached a verdict yesterday. I had not gone to the courthouse. I did not need to see them in orange jumpsuits to know I had won. The headline was simple. "Former socialites sentenced to 15 years for fraud and grand larceny." I swiped the notification away. It was old news. They were ghosts to me now, fading memories of a lesson learned the hard way. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf. In the center, on a small stand, was the photograph of me and my father fishing. The one I had kept in my wallet during those dark nights in the car. I touched the frame gently. "You were right, Dad," I whispered. Tears are for grieving. Action is for living. I was not just the good steward of the money anymore. I was the good steward of my own life. I had taken the wreckage of my past and built a fortress. My assistant buzzed again. Mrs. Thomas, the reporters are here for the Forbes interview. They want to know the secret to your success. I straightened my blazer and checked my reflection in the glass. I looked strong. I looked capable. I looked like a woman who could survive a storm and come out the other side dry. Tell them I am ready, Leo, I said. I walked toward the door, my head held high. The past was a closed book, the future was an open ledger, and for the first time in my life I was the one holding the pen. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness of the Washington countryside. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. I was driving my new car. It was not a McLaren. It was not a flashy symbol of insecurity meant to impress strangers. It was a solid, reliable luxury sedan bought with my own earnings from the firm. It smelled of fresh leather and quiet success. The engine hummed a low, steady sound that felt like a heartbeat. I checked the dashboard clock. It was nearly midnight. I had just finished a late dinner with a client who had successfully divorced her abusive husband and kept her software company intact. We had toasted with sparkling water. It was a victory toast, another asset protected, another life reclaimed. To my right, the landscape began to change. The trees thinned out, replaced by tall chain-link fences, topped with razor wire, that glinted under the harsh floodlights. The state penitentiary rose from the marshlands like a concrete scar on the earth. It was a fortress of misery, gray and imposing, designed to strip men of their dignity. I slowed down slightly, not because I wanted to look, but because the road curved around the perimeter. High up in one of the guard towers, a searchlight swept across the yard. Somewhere inside those walls, in a cell that measured 6 feet by 8 feet, Gavin Wilson was sleeping. Or maybe he was awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where it all went wrong. My phone, which was mounted on the dashboard, lit up with a notification. It was an automated email from the Department of Corrections. Subject: visitation request denied. Inmate Wilson Gavin. Number 89402. Status rejected by recipient. This was the 10th time he had tried to put me on his visitation list. The first few times the requests were accompanied by frantic letters sent through his lawyer. He had begged, he had bargained. He had promised to tell me where he hid a few watches he hadn't sold if I would just come and see him. He wanted closure. He wanted to yell at me. He wanted to blame me. Or maybe he just wanted to see a familiar face in a sea of strangers. I reached out and swiped the notification away. It vanished from the screen, instantly deleting his desperate attempt to reach me. I did not feel a surge of triumph. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I felt absolutely nothing. It was the same feeling I had when I deleted a spam email or threw away a piece of junk mail. Gavin was no longer a person to me. He was a bad investment that had been written off. He was a line item in a ledger that had been closed, audited, and filed away in the archives. I remembered the man who had stood in the rain and laughed at me. I remembered the man who had called me useless. That man was dead. The prisoner in that cell was just a ghost, haunting a building I would never enter. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, responding instantly to my command. The prison slipped backward, moving out of my peripheral vision. I did not check the rearview mirror. I did not look back to see the guard towers fading into the night. My father had taught me that looking backward only slows you down. You cannot drive a car by staring at where you have been. You have to look at where you are going. And where I was going was beautiful. Ahead of me, the skyline of Seattle began to emerge from the darkness. It was a galaxy of lights against the black velvet sky. The Space Needle pierced the clouds, a beacon of innovation. The skyscrapers shimmered with the energy of 1,000,000 lives, 1,000,000 stories, and 1,000,000 transactions. It was a city of commerce and opportunity. I saw the lights of my office building, tall and proud, in the financial district. I saw the lights of the Artemis shelter where women were sleeping safely tonight because of the art I had sold. I saw the lights of the apartment I had bought, a penthouse with a view of the water where I lived on my own terms. The city was waiting for me. It was a canvas and I was the artist. I was no longer the daughter of a billionaire or the wife of a socialite. I was Audrey. I was the architect of my own fortune. I rolled down the window, letting the cold night air rush into the cabin. It tasted of salt water and pine and freedom. I turned up the radio. A jazz song was playing, something complex and rhythmic. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. The road ahead was wide open. There were no gates. There were no locks. There were no conditions. I had navigated the storm. I had survived the flood. And now I was driving into the light. The prison was miles behind me now, swallowed by the dark. The notification on my screen was gone. The past was silent. I smiled at the road ahead. The engine purred. The city lights grew brighter and brighter until they filled my entire vision, turning the night into day. I drove straight into the brilliance, ready for whatever came next. The account was balanced. The books were closed. And for the first time in my life, I was truly free. Fade to black. The most profound lesson from Audrey's journey is that financial literacy is not merely a professional skill, it is a survival mechanism. For years, Gavin believed that power came from spending, showing off, and assuming entitlement. He treated wealth like a bottomless pit and viewed legal contracts as boring suggestions. In contrast, Audrey understood that true power lies in the details. She didn't win this war because she was louder or more aggressive. She won because she understood the rules of the game better than the man trying to play it. This story illustrates the terrifying danger of financial dependency. When you outsource your financial agency to a partner, you are handing them the keys to your life. Gavin thought he was the man of the house, but he was merely a passenger in a vehicle he didn't know how to drive. Audrey, however, quietly mastered the map. When the crisis hit, her knowledge of trusts, assets, and laws became her armor. She proved that dignity isn't given to you by a spouse. It is secured by your own capability and independence. Ultimately, Audrey teaches us that the greatest revenge is not toxic retaliation, but absolute success. She didn't just survive Gavin's betrayal. She used the very tools he mocked, discipline, intelligence, and foresight, to build a fortress he couldn't touch. In a world full of Gavins who rely on bluffs and arrogance, be an Audrey. Read the fine print, own your assets, and never let anyone else hold the pen that writes your destiny. Stop being a passenger in your own life. Take control of your finances today and build a future that no one can take away from you.